In this short video, I'll go over the characteristics and behaviors of a good critical thinker. This information can be found in the course under Unit 1, Learning Materials, on the page titled Characteristics and Behaviors of Critical Thinkers. So what we see when we look through this page is that there are some headings, and these headings correlate pretty closely with sort of a list of characteristics or behaviors of critical thinkers. So the first one is to look for different perspectives. Don't only consider things from one point of view. A good critical thinker will think about things from multiple perspectives. Try to figure out what the other side thinks about a situation, for example. Another thing is to look for assertions and really understand what the argument is that's being made so that they know what it is that they're trying to agree or disagree with, or so they can understand clearly the argument in order to decide which side they need to be on. Looking for multiple solutions is another skill or behavior of a critical thinker. Instead of just taking the easiest solution or the first thing that pops into your mind, a good critical thinker will consider alternatives and look for different solutions. There might be a more efficient one or a better one, and so you have to take a little bit of extra time to really think through what all the possible solutions might be for a situation. The most important thing that a critical thinker does is look for the logic and evidence behind an argument. You can't believe something if you don't understand the evidence that it's based on. You don't necessarily want to make an argument or believe an argument if it isn't based on good, strong evidence. So there needs to be strong logic and there needs to be accurate evidence. We'll talk later in the course about information literacy and the CRAP test. Credibility, relevance, accuracy, authority, and purpose. Those are all things that you should be looking for when you're trying to determine whether the evidence behind an argument is valid or not. And these are some great questions that you can ask in order to do that. Some things that you also want to do as a good critical thinker would be to consider controversial topics, particularly from a position of logic and learning instead of emotion. Sometimes we get very emotional about things. We react based on the way that we feel, and it's better to be a good critical thinker if you are reacting from a place of logic. So stop, slow down, think logically about it, consider perspectives, which we talked about earlier. Consider alternatives sort of, I think, falls along with some of the things we talked about earlier in terms of looking for alternate perspectives and looking for multiple solutions. I think that consider alternatives kind of gets wrapped up in those same skills. Consider the source is really important, and this again relates to the information literacy information we'll talk about later in the unit. Where does this information come from? Can I trust this source? It's like if you're going to go buy a car, do you just trust what the car salesman tells you, or do you do some research on your own? So you have to consider the source as a good critical thinker. And there are a few other skills that good critical thinkers tend to develop, and that is, first of all, making sure that they define the terms of the argument very clearly. And when I say argument, I don't mean like a fight between two people. I mean an argument that is meant to convince an audience, right? So if I'm making an argument or trying to draw a conclusion or convince you of something, then it's important that you understand the terminology that I'm using so that we're both on the same page. It's also important to really try to understand someone or something before you begin to judge it or criticize it. That's very important as a critical thinker. The last thing that I want to mention that I think is really important here is to be willing to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, I need more information. Sometimes we jump to conclusions and we just pick a side without really understanding the implications of the argument. In order to do some of these things, critical thinkers sometimes really have to grapple with their thinking. They have to spend time thinking about it. Why are they thinking what they're thinking? Where did these opinions and ideas come from? Are they biased or not? And it can help sometimes to journal about that. The last thing I want to mention as a critical thinking skill, which is not anywhere on this page, is the idea that good critical thinkers should be curious and want to learn and understand more about the world around them. That's a key element. So based on this page, there's a list here. These are the main characteristics of a good critical thinker. And these are the things that I'm hoping will show up in your personal essays. So when you address like what critical thinking skills are addressed, or which critical thinking skills have you used, or which ones were lacking in a situation, this is the list of critical thinking skills that I'd like you to use. Hopefully this is helpful, and as always, let me know if you have questions.